Let's get rolling on a Thursday. Glasses in session. We go to the Glasser guest line and check in with Scott Docterman. Give Scott a follow on X at Scott Docterman, national college football reporter for The Athletic. Scott, I know you're a busy man. Appreciate you spending some time with us here on Send It In. Want to get into the Big Ten as a whole a little bit later on, but focus on the Iowa Hawkeyes to start. And their head coach, Kirk Ferentz, he's the longest tenured head coach in college football, been there 27 years. I mean, how does Kirk continue to do it, and how much longer do you think he has there in Iowa City?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I've posed to him just as recently as a couple of weeks ago when I had a sit down with him. And Kirk is he's handled these changes really well, and I think better than I would have expected. I mean, you look at Kirk and you wonder about 10 years ago, man, he's not built for any kind of pay for play or any of these new things that have happened, the transfer portal. But instead, he's really adapted to it. He actually enjoys it, and a lot of it's his NFL background. He now looks at it as a way. He always believed the players should be paid, and now they are, and now they're paid what now they can decide who gets what through their the $20.5 million at the athletic department. So he's done really well there. Now, as far as his future goes, he turns 70 in August. And so I think he's kind of in a year to year, but he's in great shape. He seems to be energized by this new era. They really did a nice job in the portal, and they have a team that's capable, if everything plays out right, of competing for the upper level of the Big Ten and potentially a college football playoff berth. So in his case, he's done a pretty nice job, and he's got himself a pretty decent team as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, whenever we think Kirk Ferentz, we think about Iowa, it's always about that defense, right? That's where it starts with Phil Parker, who's been his longtime assistant defensive coordinator. What do you expect out of the Iowa defense yet again this season?
Yeah, they had a lot of turnover this year, which at first gives you a pause on thinking that maybe this team might take a step back. But the players that they lost were impactful, but I think they are in many ways replaceable. Now, Jay Higgins may be a tough one. He was a first-team All-American middle linebacker, and he was all over the field, definitely the leader. That's going to be a tough ask for his replacement. But you look up front, and they've got a couple of guys that have gone from being rotational players to actually pretty good starters to now I think they're got a chance to take that next step. And that's Max Llewellyn and Aaron Graves as seniors. And then in the secondary, they've got 5 players that are really taken off. And they lost a couple to the NFL, but in some ways they're more athletic in the back end. Now, if they could be as stable there, then I think this defense is going to be comparable to what we've seen in the last handful of years, which, I don't know if they'll lead the country in yards per play allowed like it did 2 and 3 years ago, the back-to-back years, but I think that they're going to be a very salty unit that'll keep Iowa in games and not get drug up and down the field.
On the other side of the ball, Scott, obviously a couple years ago for Iowa, it was a really rough watch on offense. So they bring in Tim Lester last year, his first year. What were the overall impressions in year one with him running the offense? And what are they expecting out of that offense this year? They bring in a really experienced FCF quarterback in Mark Gronkowski.
It was a really big move to get Tim Lester. And his style of play is that he runs a Shanahan offense, which is unique to college football, but he's been in that system for a while in the NFL. And last year you saw it really take off in the running game. Iowa had its highest yards per game average since 2002. And you had Caleb Johnson, who was a consensus first-team All-American, really did a nice job in the running game because of his adjustments with that system. Now in the passing game, it wasn't good at all, which isn't unusual, unfortunately, for Iowa the last few years. But I think that they've made a lot of strides in the offseason. As you mentioned, Mark Gronkowski, last year he had kind of what I would consider a subpar season for him because he had a slightly torn labrum, but he still was one of the best passers in the country. In 2023, he was FCS Player of the Year. He led South Dakota State to 2 national titles. And what he can bring this offense is he can make every pass. He can run the zone read, which is what they'll want him to do at times, some RPO, but also he'll be able to take off in those situations. And Iowa hasn't had many quarterbacks who can do that over the last 10 years probably, that because he does have great straight ahead speed and he's very physical. So he brings a dimension that Iowa hasn't had at quarterback. And when you combine that to one of the most veteran offensive lines, talented offensive lines, plus some pretty good running backs, and a group of receivers that they're maybe surprisingly excited about, I think this offense may surprise some people. I think they went from 15 points a game to 27 last year. I'm not going to suggest a 12-point growth again, but I think that it's fair to say that this team can get into the 30s this year, scoring points on offense. And if the defense can play the way it's capable of playing, that puts Iowa squarely in the upper echelon of the Big Ten.
We're talking Iowa Hawkeyes, Big Ten here with Scott Docterman on Send It In, National College Football reporter for The Athletic. Scott, I want to ask you about Iowa's schedule because I really think it's fascinating for the upcoming year. Avoid Michigan and Ohio State. And on paper, I think you can argue their three toughest games are all at home: Penn State, Oregon, and Indiana. The road schedule is really tough, though, right? At Iowa State, at Wisconsin, at Nebraska, at USC. Like, they got a bunch of games on the road that they absolutely could lose. The win total is at 7.5. What was your prediction for Iowa this season? How many games do you think they win? And what do you think is the toughest game on that schedule for them?
It's a fantastically entertaining schedule, but it's also one that is going to freak out anybody who wants to bet on them. Because, as you said, you've got those games where they play 4 teams that won 11 games last year. However, I would say that, having Penn State and Oregon at home gives them that advantage. And Kinnick is a place where top 5 teams have gone to die for almost 20 years. Yeah. So you think that they could pull that upset, but then they're playing their rivals, 3 of them, on the road in Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Iowa State. So that's going to be a challenge for them. I mean, I'd like them over on 7.5, but if things don't work out, I could see them being like a really aggravating 7-win team where they lose 4 games by 3 points or less because of some of these matchups. But I think, with Indiana coming to Iowa City, I think that's one of the biggest games in the Big Ten this year, because I think it'll tell us a lot about both teams, and it'll really dictate whether either one of them has a chance to go to the playoff this year. And then, Wisconsin has the worst or most difficult schedule in the country, and it's part of that grind for the Badgers in October where they play Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, and then Oregon consecutively, which isn't a schedule I wish on my worst rival or enemy. And so I think, Iowa has the potential to win these games, and they have great special teams, which will help them. But, each one of these will be a very big challenge for the Hawkeyes.
Scott, I think the Big Ten is so interesting, right? It feels like it's in tiers almost. You have your Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan tier, and then there's kind of that next tier with teams like Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska. Any one of these teams could emerge. Maybe they win 10 games, maybe they just win 6 games of kind of that middle group with that tier beneath the top tier. Who's a team that you think could emerge? Maybe they become this year's Indiana, surprise some people, maybe long shot type team potentially to make the playoff out of the Big Ten.
I like Washington in that regard. I think Washington last year made major strides compared to where I thought they would sit. I mean, going from the national title game, losing their coach, 21 out of 22 starters, and then they make a bowl game. But what makes me bullish on the Huskies is quarterback. Damon Williams has all the talent in the world. He is an electrifying player. He proved it in the one start he had, but I think he's got a chance to really take the Big Ten by storm. And I don't know if that they're going to be able to get to the playoff. It's going to be a real grind for the teams, as you said, kind of in that second tier, at least if nothing else in perception, if nothing else. But you got Iowa, Illinois won 10 games last year, returns a heavy dose of its roster. Indiana, best season in school history. Nebraska, everybody expects them to eventually get to where they should be, but we'll wait and see. But I think Washington is the one team that I will say I think has a chance to maybe take that leap and enter in the playoff conversation that people aren't talking about.
I like it. Great stuff. Scott Docterman, kind enough to join us here on Send It In. Give him a follow on X at Scott Docterman, National College Football reporter for The Athletic. You can check out all of his great work there as well. Scott, really appreciate the time, man. Know you're busy. Enjoy the college football season. Hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me, PJ. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Really good stuff there from Scott. All right, you guys, let's talk some Iowa Hawkeyes now here on the show. And again, one of the more fascinating schedules in the Big Ten. They avoid Michigan and Ohio State. and then look at the home games and look at all the road games that they have. Feel like all these Big Ten schedules that we've seen, teams had a road game at Maryland, Northwestern, Purdue, one of kind of the bottom teams in the conference. Iowa really doesn't have that. You look at their entire road schedule, and they absolutely could lose any one of those games. At Iowa State week 2 against a ranked opponent, that's not going to be easy. At Rutgers, that's not going to be an easy game. They're going to be favored, but never easy to go in there. Iowa's probably going to be like 3.5-point favorite, somewhere around there against them. At Wisconsin, obviously a big rivalry game. And then at USC and at Nebraska as well, 2 of the final 3 weeks of the season. So it's tricky. The home games, though, as Scott was saying, right? Kinnick is where top 5 teams go to die. I don't know if they're going to beat Penn State and Oregon, but I certainly think there's a chance that they can win one of those 2 games. And then obviously the game against Indiana feels like it could be a massive game. One of those games that if you bet Iowa over win total, you're going to need the Hawkeyes to win. I think this is the best quarterback, though, that Iowa's had in a while in Mark Gronkowski. I was a big fan of this pickup by Kirk Ferentz and his coaching staff in the offseason. Played 5 years at the FCS level at South Dakota State. Experienced guy. Broke a ton of school records. They had a lot of success, won a national championship. He decided to stay there at South Dakota State, and now he's using his extra year to play in the Big Ten at Iowa. That's certainly the concern, right? That jump in competition, going from an FCS schedule to now playing in the Big Ten against all those types of teams that he's going to be facing this year. I mean, there's no cupcakes on that schedule outside of Albany and UMass. All the Big Ten games that they have are going to be pretty tricky. So it's a tough schedule. That's going to be obviously what Gronkowski is going to have to deal with. But with Iowa, the beauty of them is that there are certain areas where you never have to worry. You never have to worry about Iowa when it comes to offensive line, never have to worry about Iowa when it comes to running back, and you never have to worry about Iowa when it comes to defense and how about special teams. We know Iowa's always got one of the best punters, kickers in college football. It obviously is about the quarterback and the wide receiver. And the wide receiver room for Iowa. But this is one of the teams year after year, and this is why Kirk Ferentz has remained in Iowa City for so long. Talk about the word identity so much in the game of football and in sports. We all know Iowa's identity, right? Hard-nosed, physical, defense, run the football, win games 17-14. That's what Iowa wants to do. So I'm really interested to see how Gronkowski plays this season. I was a big fan of his. Watched a couple games at the FCS level. Obviously, a lot of those FCS schools open up the season against FBS schools, and you get a chance to watch him play. But he's a good athlete, and he can throw the football. They're got to replace Caleb Johnson, who's off to the NFL with the Steelers. But, man, it's really hard for me to bet against Kirk Ferentz. And the win total for Iowa is sitting at 7.5 with the over at plus 120. It's tough, right? Because, again, in theory, they absolutely could lose all those road games. The home schedule, Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, not easy at all. But Iowa, it just feels like wins at the very worst, like 8 games every single year. And you're getting them at plus 120. So I think that's a bet on Iowa personally. If I were to bet the win total, I would look over plus 120 for Iowa. All these middle-of-the-pack teams, right? Everybody loves Illinois. Talked about Nebraska a couple weeks ago. Love them. Washington's been getting some love here on the show as well. But Iowa, just every year, we kind of forget about the Hawkeyes, and we look up and they win 8-9 games. So I'd look over 7.5 wins for Iowa at plus 120.